Hey everybody, welcome back. This is After Wine School. I'm Keith Wallace. This is Alana Zerbe. And today we are talking about sustainability. Yes, sustainability. I like it. That's how I'm going to say it from now on. Like I'm a minister. But the question is, and this is the real question, when you're buying a bottle of wine with green certification, are you buying into the sustainability or are you buying into greenwashing? It's always a question. And here's the thing. Sustainability isn't one thing in wine. It's farming, it's winemaking, and how it gets to your glass.
That's great, Keith.
Yes.
We are going to talk about all of those things today. So this is a huge issue in wine. And
Huge.
this is something that we came up with when we were talking about biodynamic winemaking.
Oh, one of my favorite things to talk about.
And it was like, we have to do this. We
Yeah.
have to do a whole episode. And so this is going to be chock full. We're going to walk you through sort of what sustainability is, what certifications there are out there, what innovations there are. So lots of good stuff. And I'm going to kick us off just with an overview of the terms we're working with in this field.
That's smart.
So at its very basic, sustainability, it's kind of like natural wine. People kind of know what it means, but it doesn't have an exact term. In the farming world, in the agricultural world, when you're talking about sustainability, you have a future focus. So you have an ability and a willingness and a desire to implement long-term practices that preserve the agro ecosystem. So you want to prioritize soil health. So one of the most common things you see in sustainable viticulture are cover crops. So you look at a vineyard, in between the rows of vines, you see other plants growing, not just grass, but oftentimes native plants, perennials, things like mustards. Those are wonderful at nitrogen fixing and maintaining the health of the soil, because part of sustainability is also avoiding pesticides, synthetic fertilizers, things that deplete the soil over time. So in sustainability, your focus is long-term. So cover crops are a big part of that. Also introducing beneficial organisms like ladybugs that can cut down on certain pests that can damage your vines. So that's sustainability, long-term focus. Regenerative agriculture is looking at replenishing what has been depleted over time. So soil and water are two things that are big concerns with regenerative agriculture, but it builds upon that sustainability focus. Regenerative is really about restoration of biological and chemical properties that have been lost over time, which happens in farming. That's very natural. And then we get to your favorite, biodynamic.
Yay. Yep.
Why don't you tell us what biodynamic is?
Okay. Well, there's a couple ways of thinking about this. Now, biodynamic on the surface level is all inputs come from the farm. You do not bring anything in. So like, for instance, right, if you need manure, you have sheep and horses and goats, cows, and it's purely self-sustaining. This is what we're talking about. And it's a beautiful way of doing things. There's a lot about it that I love, and it's structured on science and really good practices, but it's dressed up like a religion. Mm-hmm. So it's good science, good agricultural practice dressed up as a religion following the lunar calendar.
So biodynamic farming was a philosophy that was started by Rudolf Steiner in the 1920s, and it really is closer to a religion. There's a lot of spiritual elements, a lot of cultural elements, but at its foundation, it does incorporate sustainable and regenerative principles, and there's a lot of science that has backed it up.
It is actually phenomenal. Like the stress levels in vineyards, especially in droughts, is shown like consistently we're getting better products in biodynamic. And I think it's just because we execute more. Like, it's easy to execute when it's a part of like your daily practice. And it's also part of, like, it's winemaker yoga. That's what it really is. Like if you keep with the practice, it works.
Mm-hmm. And I also want to mention that biodynamic farming is actually what was incorporated in Burgundy and Champagne in the 20th century. It was applied to vineyards that had really been damaged through many decades of use, but also after World War II. And so
Yes.
it is beloved, especially by French winemakers. Very, very high-end winemakers employ these practices.
Oh, yeah.
And then finally, I want to mention organic. So organic is not unique to winemaking. Organic is, at least in the U.S., a program administered by the USDA. It is about avoiding synthetic pesticides and fertilizers. You cannot use GMO crops, but it is heavily reliant on record keeping by the winery, inspections, and the certification itself is quite expensive. So organic is something that is very top down. It's very hierarchical, although its goals are similar to what we mentioned with sustainability.
Absolutely. And I think let's just talk about the certifications a little bit here.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to jump onto the USDA organic. So the phrase organic has lost a lot of value in America, largely because of how, I will say, USDA treated this. It went from being something that was highly sought after, and now, even if you're organic, oftentimes you're not going to put it on your wine because it has negative connotations. And this has been going on for several decades now. Why is this? Well, how the EU sees organic is in vineyard practices. Are you organic in your vineyard practices? Not in how you make the wine. In the US, a lot of vineyards are organic, but to have it called organic on the label means you also cannot use any preservatives. Now, this is a problem. This is a huge problem because the only preservative we use is naturally occurring in wine, which is SO2, or we call it meta, or you would probably know it as sulfites, right? That's the only one, and it's in very, very low levels. But the level they put it at was so low that even if you make your wines without any SO2, you may actually have it above their level.
Wow.
And that's largely due to the fact that when you ferment things, it produces SO2. And we add a little bit more to ensure that the wines don't just last for 6 months or a year, but might last in a bottle for like 5 to 10 years or more. That's why we do it. And it's at such low levels. A fig Newton has more sulfur compounds than a bottle of wine, or actually even a case of wine, to be honest. So this is a problem. So that certification is useless because oftentimes to get there, you actually have to use other products to actually preserve your wines, which are not going to be really nice. Like there was for a long time, the way around it was actually use a product that was derived from chicken embryos. Like that's not product's not used anymore, but that's how we did it, which was pretty gross. And you didn't have to list that on the label. So there's that. But biodynamic didn't go down that route. Now, biodynamic certification, like for instance, Demeter and SIP, and there's a couple of others that are really great. Lodi does a good one. There's a couple others.
Demeter is the official certification for biodynamic.
Biodynamic.
I just want to make that.
That's actually, we should say, the other ones were local. Demeter is the big one, international. And it's fantastic. How it focuses and how it implements, it's outstanding. But that comes with a cost. And that's the hard part about that. To do that and to make sure you're following all their incredibly stringent rules, that annual cost is somewhere going to be another around $10,000 to $20,000 for compliance that they wouldn't have to do if they were just going biodynamic on their own. So this is a big problem about the economics of the whole situation.
Right. And there's a tension here, too, where you were mentioning when we were talking about this offline earlier, that for some small farmers, it's almost offensive that you would assume that they are not sustainable.
Oh, thank you.
In some way.
No, that's true. Because when you come down to it, no winery wants to spend money that they don't have to. For certification, we don't like the fact, small wineries, I'll speak for all of us, we don't like the fact that we're compared to them, who probably are not organic or probably have really industrial practices, whereas those of us who only have like 3 or 4 employees, we want to make the healthiest, most beautiful product because we drink it ourselves. We never want to put down sprays. We never want to do anything we don't have to. So we are probably practicing organic or close to it just because our nature, because we're only producing 15,000 cases a year. We're not producing millions of cases. So that's the big thing. And I do personally find it insulting that I have to differentiate myself from a mass producer when it should be obvious. It should be obvious. Just come, anytime I work in a vineyard, the first thing I do is, I put in raptor nests. And so you'll see the dead bunnies. You'll see them. Why? Because the raptors like bunnies are delicious, and it's really embarrassing when you take someone through a vineyard and there's, half-eaten rabbit. But that's a part of being, like, say, biodynamic. You can see it in the vineyard. You can actually see how messy it is. You ever walk through a vineyard and there's just nothing there? It's all just like clean.
Oh, I hate that. And when they're 10 feet wide
Yeah,
rows.
because you drive your truck
Right.
down there, putting a spray down, with your Roundup, which literally is Roundup. So anyways, that you are 100% right.
Yeah, no, that's great. And we're going to talk about some tips for the consumer, which include actually looking at the vineyard.
Oh yeah, we'll talk about that in a
In
little more
bit.
detail.
And I do just want to mention, you would assume that some things are included in sustainable practices when in fact they're not. So when we talk about sustainability, you're talking about future viability, preserving the land. Well, what's part of that in a vineyard is the labor, the people. And unfortunately, these paradigms that we have now, they are not taking those considerations into account.
That is actually really true. This bothers me a great deal because there was a biodynamic winery in Italy that actually was found to be utilizing slave labor.
Traffic labor.
This was insane. They were a large producer and they were producing a massive amount of wine. They were an industrial winery, but they had all the certifications. They had paid for everything. They were doing, except for the fact that they were treating people inhumanely.
But they got all the reflected glory,
all of it,
being sustainable
and beloved and natural and all that. Everyone, actually, a point, I'm not going to say who they are, obviously, because you can look it up. Like, that's the one thing I'm really proud of with American production, that we traditionally and continually actually pay very well, because we're trying to make an elite product and we need to have people well trained.
So let's talk about some winery practices, some specific things that wineries can do.
Yeah, absolutely.
That fall under this rubric.
The biggest one, like one of the biggest unsustainable things about a winery is our use of water. We use so much water. You may be using up to 10, 20 gallons of water per bottle of wine that you produce. So like, there's a huge amount of water. That is a huge piece. So the things that we're doing, first off, dry farming. Now, this is an old way of making wine, is actually not having any irrigation whatsoever. Mm-hmm. Other things, we're using very controlled irrigation. So instead of just like irrigating, like spray irrigating, now what we're doing is we have machine learning, also known as AI now, systems tying in the entire vineyards so that you can sense evaporation, sense heat, because water evaporation is a good sign that your heat index is going too high. Or also checking for stress levels within vineyards, not just vineyards, but even like small blocks. And we're doing that with satellite imaging, but also now drones as well. And then only watering like the tiniest amount right at the head of the root so that we have almost no loss whatsoever. Now, also CO2 capture is starting to happen. Now, carbon dioxide is fantastic to push away oxygen. That's what it does. We can reuse that and reuse that in the winery to do similar things. We usually use argon, which is very expensive. Some places are utilizing CO2. But what we're also doing is there's now systems where you can actually store it, repackage it so that's ready for resale to breweries, because breweries use a lot more CO2 and they pay for it. So now we can actually have this renewable resource.
Wow.
There's also yeast being engineered to produce less CO2 as well. Finally, the other thing that we've been doing forever is actually utilizing our byproduct. What it used to be was that the yeast, the grape skins, everything else would just get thrown away. Mm-hmm. Now it's being reutilized actually in agriculture. That turns into a really wonderful nitrogen fixing kind of fertilizer. Yeah, compost. If we can actually capture CO2 efficiently and then resell it or reuse it, yeah, there's less cost. There's a term that I use and a lot of other winemakers use is being a lazy winemaker. And I've used it in this podcast before, and it's not a negative. It's not saying like I'm not going to do anything. I just don't want to spend or do anything I don't have to do.
Oh, well, the way you described it previously was that it requires a huge amount of self-control, but also confidence in what you're doing to just let things play out.
Oh, absolutely. Exactly. Yeah. Yep. No inputs that you don't have to do, planning ahead, not for just for weeks, but days, months, years. That's how you think.
So another corollary to this discussion, of course, is not just winery practices, but actually delivering the wine to the consumer. So packaging and shipping.
Oh, yeah.
Something that's not covered under these certifications either, but are hugely important to the discussion about sustainability in wine and hugely important to consumers.
Oh, it's huge. The fact that this isn't covered is stunning to me.
It is. So the most obvious is glass bottle production. If folks don't know, glass bottles previously were recycled. Today, they are not being recycled. We have lost our trade partner, China, in that endeavor. We religiously put them in the recycling bin, as you should, but just understand that that business has collapsed. And so this is just pure waste at this point. Glass bottles are incredibly energy intensive to produce, especially those heavy bottles take up a lot of energy. So there are wine critics who are now not willing to even review those wine bottles.
Yep.
They are submitted to them for review. So that is something that is changing. So there are alternatives. If you're in Europe, you can get amazing wine in a box. So bag and box programs from wineries are amazing. The Scandies have been really pushing this, and the only downside to it is the same thing that we have with the screw cap. It's consumer rejection of this as commensurate with fine wine consumption. It's just one of these things. But bag and box, getting wine in a bladder with a plastic cap is absolutely fantastic. Of course, you're not going to age this wine.
Oh, I want to now. Oh, I'm going to. Here is my 1963 strawberry Chardonnay.
But those things are fantastic. And cans also. Now, the wine has to be engineered a little bit differently. So the winery does have to take steps to match their winemaking to the can. But cans can be a great alternative. So that's your packaging. But let's talk about transportation.
That's right. That's right.
Fossil fuel use. Huge. Ironically, overseas shipping, getting something by boat rather than by land shipping by truck is much more energy efficient. So hugely. So it might be a little bit counterintuitive, but if you're concerned about the environmental impact of your wine, saying, well, I won't buy imported wine is actually not going to help.
No. And why is it so expensive? Well, largely it is actually the weight of those bottles. And these heavy bottles add so much weight, but also for the boxes because you actually have to reinforce those boxes. So you're adding a significant amount of weight to it. And just shipping by 18-wheeler is much more expensive for your carbon imprint. But also one of the things you should look at is most wineries and most wine regions around the world are actually next to water. They've been that way forever because that's how you transported everything, was by water. And so this has always been efficient, incredibly so. The cost for shipping is negligible, but also your carbon output is incredibly low, which everyone's surprised at. You assume that you buy a wine from Bordeaux and that was going to be less sustainable than buying something from Napa. But here on the East Coast, that means that Napa is actually less sustainable for transportation than from Europe, from France. But there's a lot of things. Now, other innovations that we have that are really important to mention. First off, solar. Now, this is a, of course, moment because we make wine in places where we have a high level of sunshine, like a lot of degree days, a lot of sunshine. So these are perfect. So a lot of wineries now, are self-sustaining that way. And that's actually great as well, because then you don't have to be tied into the grid. Other things that are happening where you're seeing tests being done on having solar panels actually above vineyards in places that are a little hotter, that maybe have too much sun. And they're finding that's incredibly effective as well, to actually having very specialized solar panels over the vines.
That's amazing.
So I love this. So yeah, solar is huge. You see a little bit of wind power coming in. There are plenty of places that have access to wind. Like for instance, the Mistral in the Rhone Valley, you're starting to see a lot of windmills in that area to take advantage of that. It's great for the vines. It's also great for energy production. The other thing, you mentioned cover crops. Mm-hmm. And I want to point this out. Everyone can do this. So cover crops make sense. Like people now, their lawns, like they're adding clover to them. Why? Because grass pulls up the nitrogen and nitrogen fixes it. And it adds to the soils. every year. So you get healthier and healthier soils year in, year out. It's good for lawn, it's good for vineyards. But also in vineyards, they're actually encouraging the bugs, right? Because bugs are important. You mentioned ladybugs, and now ladybugs are good, but there's others that are even more beneficial, including things like certain kinds of native wasps and native bees. So we actually intentionally add competition. All of this. We even use it now to encourage certain bugs and animals to not go into the vineyards. So we can actually have around the vineyards, we'll have specific kinds of crops that, like, say, glassy winged sharpshooters will hang out in instead of coming to the vineyards, things like that. And this is great because this is also things that you can do at home too, by the way. If you want ticks or mosquitoes to go elsewhere, right? There's things you can plant that discourage them being near you, but then plant other things to encourage them to be elsewhere.
So, well, you're kind of segueing into some great advice, some takeaways that
Yes.
we hope people glean from this episode. Yes, absolutely. Start incorporating biodiversity and cover crops, some integrated pest management principles into your gardens, your yards. That's a wonderful thing. But also, as wine buyers, look for the less heavy bottles. Vote with your pocketbook. And if there is some great wine that's in an alternative package, support it, buy it.
Vote with your dollars. Like you mentioned Kathy Corzon. You ever notice how she uses really lightweight bottles? So the next time you see a heavy bottle, just put that back and say, F that. Let's grab that lighter bottle. What they're saying is, oh, we are actually more interested in sustainability than actually getting the sale. Hell yeah, buy that one. That's a badass fucking product.
Yeah.
Yeah, trust it. Buy it. Vote with your money, people. Vote with your money.
And then when it comes to certifications, you know, I always, if I'm looking at a tech sheet and I see there's some type of sustainability certification, that's always of interest. And I give tip and a hat for sure. But I also think it's really important to remember what we talked about earlier, which is the cost associated with these certifications. One of the best things you can do to be an informed consumer is do a site visit. Visit the vineyards themselves. Ask questions. See how they're tending to their vines.
You can always assume that a winery will do what their neighbors do. We live in small little towns. Winemakers all hang out with each other. Winery owners all know each other. We share a culture. We're sharing actually people like employees and services, everything. So if something's very popular in one area, say like organic winemaking, then you can assume that everyone's doing it. Largely because if everyone's doing it and you're the odd man out, you're not going to get invited to those cool parties. If you're not doing biodynamic and everyone else is, like,
Pressure is real.
it's real. And especially because the costs drop when everyone else is doing it, because there's such a level of knowledge there and level of expertise that the cost drops significantly. So, like, for instance, if you're looking at a very high altitude wine region, like say Mendoza in Argentina, they're actually by default organic because they don't ever have to put down sprays. They're way above the line where you can even expect to have any kind of major pests. And it's so dry that you're not going to have to be worrying about mildews, well, especially the white ones. Or like, for instance, like Loire Valley, if you were not biodynamic, you're going to be a freak show. People are just going to wonder, do you kill puppies for fun? Like, what the hell's wrong with you?
But it's a complicated issue. Hopefully this was informative and helps you to have a good discussion the next time you want to talk with a winemaker or somebody in the wine trade or just a friend about sustainability in wine.
Oh, absolutely.
All right, folks, this was wonderful. Coming up for you next time, we are going to do sort of a build your palate part 2. So we're going to be talking about taste sensations, acid, sweetness, bitterness on your tongue. So tune in for that.
Oh, that's fantastic. A little peek into our L2 program and all that. That's good. That'll be awesome. But folks, did you like this? You did, because you're still listening. So like and subscribe and tell other people. I mean, if you're still listening and if you haven't liked and subscribed, what is wrong with you? Now, also, if you like what we're doing here and you want to be a part of things, I recommend getting your certification, learning, educating yourself, be a part of this culture that we're building here. And the way to do that The National Wine School. Take their online programming. It's fantastic.
And what is the website, Keith?
Oh, that's at wineschool.us. Of course, wineschool.us. How America is that?
And then, folks, if you'd like to watch a video of this podcast, you can go to YouTube and see our channel, which is Wine School USA.
Fantastic, folks. Have a great day.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Cheers.
Good night.